Good evening, students. Right now, we will try to study and understand the French Revolution. French Revolution is a very important event in the world history because first time ever in the history of human history, common people were involved and they revolted against the regime. Okay, so to understand it, let's understand a little bit background of what happened. In year 1774, Louis XVI of the Bourbon dynasty was made king. He was a youngster at that time. He was only 20 years of age, and he married an Austrian princess, Marie Antoinette. And majorly in Europe and world at time, monarchy system was being practiced. Means kings used to rule over the kingdoms and states. And this was an important event also because Austria was a rival of France that time, the famous Austrian Empire you must have heard. So when he became king, uh, he was very much means astonished because he found that the treasury was completely empty. He had no money in his treasury to run the daily administration also, and also because there was a huge empire. The French empire was a huge empire, and there was a huge palace also. They lived in luxuries. There was a long chain of royal families, and also during the reign of Louis XVI, French king means France helped 13 American colonies to get their independence from the British Empire. As you know, Britain and France were also rivalries. Okay, so they were rivals. So it was a mass movement. French Revolution was a mass movement, and it is not a single day movement. It is a series of events from year 1789 to 1799. It had a far-reaching impact on world. So in this economic crisis background, you are supposed to know these two taxes. Before that, you should know the French society was divided into three parts. The whole French society was divided into three parts, which are called first state, second state, and third state. The first state was clergy or the church people, priests, etc., and second state was the nobility. Nobility were the aristocrats and the nobles of the empire. And third state was the common people. And the important fact is that about 98% of the French Revolution consisted of this third state only. And it was very much deprived, very much they were deprived, and they were being exploited by the first and second state on all grounds. They had no rights, and first and second state were having some special privileges by their birth. There were many kinds of taxes applicable on this. First was tithes. Tithes was a tax by the church, which was one tenth of the annual produce or earning, and it was levied from the third state. And there was a tally. There was the second kind of tax, which was tally. It was a direct tax by the state, means it was a tax by the king, you can say. Okay, so France was going through an important, very crucial financial crisis, and there was a loan of around 200 livres. Livres was the currency of France that time. Around 200 livres there was a loan, and the king decided to impose new taxes apart from this tithes and tally. So there was a rule in France that a king would have to call a meeting of state general. State general was the representation of the French society in which some part of nobles used to participate, some part of nobility, means nobles and clergy used to participate, and some part of third estate people also used to participate. So it was a general meeting, state meeting was a general meeting, which the king was supposed to call, and in that meeting any important decision related to taxes were used to be taken earlier also by the king. The last meeting was called in year 1614, and the king decided to call a meeting on 5th May 1789. So state general meeting was held at Sales des Etats. It was a royal building in which this meeting was being called, and the meeting was going on. And on that day, about 300 people, 300 representatives of the first estate, means the clergy, 300 representative of the nobility, and 600 representative of the third estate participated in that meeting. And there a controversy arose. A controversy was that during the final voting, there was a rule earlier that only one vote was supposed to be taken from third state, first state, one vote from the second state, and third from the one vote from the third state. Okay. But the controversy arose that the third state people now started demanding that there should be, as per earlier rule, there should be, the rule should be changed. Means earlier there was a rule that only one vote be there per state. Means only 3 votes in total will be there from each state. But the third state people started demanding that there should be 1 vote per person. Okay, so the demand was neglected, and they moved out of, they walked out of the building. They boycotted the state general building, and proclaimed that they will draft a new constitution of their own for the France. So on 20th June 1789, they assembled at tennis court at Versailles, because the king did not give permission to get assembled in Salle des Estates. So they get assembled in tennis court ground, and they took a oath that they will draft a new constitution for the France, which will be a new destiny of the France. France will be now be a constitutional monarchy. This oath was taken, and that famous day of 20th June 1789 is called the tennis court oath. Okay, now what happened on 14 July 1789? Because of this series of events from 5th May 1789 till 14th July, the France was turning into a civil war, and the common people now are totally revolted against the king and monarchy, and in fact revolted against the clergy and the nobility too. Okay, so 14 July 1789, Bastille Fortress was attacked by the mob. Bastille Fortress was a symbol of power and monarchical dictatorship, dictatorial rule. Okay, so it was demolished and attacked, and weapons and gunpowder etc. were looted by the mob. Before that, Jacques Necker was the finance minister, you can say, finance minister in the king court. He was looking after the finances of the country. He was dismissed by the king, and but after this storming of Bastille on 14 July 1789, he was later recalled and reappointed as the financial head of the country. Okay, Jacques Necker is important because he had sympathy towards the commons, because he used to think that whatever commons are doing was right. Okay, and after that, on 4th and 11th August 1789, so a new constitution was drafted, and National Assembly it was called. Okay, now State General was neglected and new constitution was drafted and National Assembly was created, in which there was the people were elected indirectly. Means the count people used to elect electors, and electors used to elect the members of the National Assembly. This was the important event, and electors were used to be the rich and prosperous and aristocratic group, and also the intellectual group of the common people and clergy and nobility people, and only active the citizens on the basis of voting were divided into active and passive citizens. Active citizens who were those citizens who had the right to vote, and over 25 years and above of age, men of 25 years and above of age, and who used to give their 3-day wages were supposed to vote, and they were called active citizens, and the rest, including all the women, were called passive voters. So this was a system of the election of the National Assembly. So important events which took place on 4th and 11th August 1789, and it was implemented by the National Assembly that the feudalism was abolished, and these three event took place. Manorialism was abolished. Manorialism was a system in which the peasants were rendered dependent on their land and lord. The peasants were totally dependent on the land and lord. Means the peasants comprised of around many of the most of the population of the France were peasants, and they were landless. Means most of the land was it used to belong to the clergy and nobility. Okay, so manorialism was abolished, and these two taxes, tithes and tally. Tithes was a tax by the church. Church used to take the 1/10 of the total annual produce or earning from the third estate people, and tally was a direct tax by the state. So all these things were abolished. Okay, and after that, on 26 August 1789, the famous Declaration of the Rights of Men and Citizen was published. Here it is important that it is the rights of men. Okay, so rights of men and citizen were published. It was a charter of human liberties, and the constitution which was drafted by the National Assembly, it came into effect on 30th September 1791, and France was proclaimed a constitutional monarchy. Now there was a system that the king was supposed to rule under the guidance of the constitution only. The constitution became the supreme power in the state in France. Okay, and National Assembly was renamed as Legislative Assembly after that. Louis XVI, he was sworn of the constitution. He took the oath of the constitution and became the supreme commander of the armed forces. Okay, so this was very important. This is what for which the people had revolted actually. So they got this on September 30, 1791. Okay. Now there was an important event. Women were neglected in the whole revolution, and the fact was that the women had struggled along with the men with equal zeal and equal enthusiasm, but they were not given any rights. The declaration was also the rights of men, not of women. So on 5th October 1789, in Versailles, the women revolted due to continuous price rise and hunger, because in France the situation became out of control. There was a financial crisis that time. It is called subsistence crisis. Subsistence crisis is a situation in which the common people are not even they are not even capable of getting their basic needs, means food, shelter. So there was subsistence crisis in France, and the whole household was the responsibility of women only, because men were mostly in war and the revolution. So they revolted on 5th October 1789, and after this, what happened on 20th June 1791, Louis XVI, he was, because fearing of the developments taking place in France, and the revolution, he decided to flee to Austria to his in-laws. So what he did, he dressed like a servant, and a servant were dressed like nobles, and they were trying to flee from France, but they were identified, and they were made captive by the common people, and they were declared traitors, because people thought that in this crucial situation, where France is undergoing a civil war and people are dying of the hunger and poverty, he was trying to take shelter to a enemy country. Austria was the enemy country, so this was also important. So he was caught and declared a traitor. Okay, so on January 21, 1793, Louis XVI was executed. So how this development took place in 1792, France was attacked by Austria and Prussia. Austria and Prussia, they both attacked France, because the neighboring countries, the kings of the neighboring countries were also very much tensed, and they were worried about the development taking place in France, because they thought that, the common people in France have revolted against their king, this may happen to their own country also. So they wanted to help King Louis XVI. So in 1792, they both attacked France, okay, in support of the king, and mob got agitated by this, and king and queen were, as a safety measure, they were being arrested by the legislative assembly. Okay, monarchy was completely abolished, and France became a republic on 20th September 1792. King was found guilty of the traitorship on 15 January 1793, and legislative assembly now renamed itself as National Convention, and king and the queen. The queen's name was Mary Antoinette. She was an Austrian princess. So King Louis XVI and Mary both were guillotined on 21st January 1793. So this was an important event also. This is very important. But this was not the end of the miseries of the people. Then came the reign of terror. A period from 5th September 1793 to 28th July 1794 is termed as reign of terror, because after the execution of the king, National Convention appointed a 12-member committee on public safety to safeguard France from external attacks and to administer the domestic issues, and Maximilien Robespierre was the head of this 12-member committee. Okay, so but he began to act like a dictator. Around 5 lakh suspects were arrested during his tenure. 17,000 were officially executed, which he supposed a threat to the revolution, and 25,000 died in summary execution. So around 40,000 people lost their life, and 5 lakh suspects were arrested during his tenure. He began to behave like a dictator, and he arrested all and punished all those who were threat to revolution, and later to himself also. He was so much so much behaving like a dictator, like that even the member of his own party were now worried about himself, about themselves, and Robespierre was arrested and executed on 28th July, 28th July 1794, and with this the reign of terror ended. Now, after this also, National Convention adopted a new constitution of the year 3 on 22nd August 1795, and now a rule of directory was imposed. National Convention created a 5 members directory with 5 years mandate. 5 members were there indirectly, and they were given a 5 years time period. But this also was a major failure in French Revolution, because this directory got involved in corruption, political conflicts, and financial problems. And the major drawback was this directory was dependent on army in terms of foreign and domestic affairs. So it was also an indirect army rule. Directory rule was indirect army rule, you can say. So on 10th November, directory was replaced by 3 councils by the National Convention. So 5-member directory was replaced by a 3-member councils, and the first member was the famous Napoleon Bonaparte. He was a military head of the nation. Emmanuel Joseph Silas, and politician Roger Ducos. So now these 3 began to rule the France. This is called a famous coup of 18 Burmain. Okay, and this also marks the end of the French Revolution. Okay, so that's all for today. Thank you.